I'm sure we'll have a few stragglers. It always happens that way, but we might just get started. So I just wanted to let everybody know that this session will be recorded. So if you don't want to have your image on, you can turn your cameras off. And I'll just repeat again, if you could keep your mics muted, that would be very helpful. I know everybody should know that by now, but sometimes we forget. So thank you so much for coming to the session today. I'm Mary Power from CTE, and we're just hosting this session, but really it's Rosina Kharal, who used to be with us at CTE many years ago, but is now a lecturer in computer science, who will be talking about a problem, a solution to a problem that we've been struggling with these 24-hour windows in exams. And we'll have this another term or two anyway, I imagine. So she's got a nice strategy for scheduling multiple set time slots for the exams. And she'll just walk through how this is set up and some strategies and what works and what doesn't. And we also have with us Funmi Onakan. Sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly, Funmi, but she is from ITMS, so the Learn Help people, and she will be very helpful in questions for tech support because she helped Rosina through the logistics of making this happen. So I won't say any more. I'll turn it over to Rosina now. And the final thing is, if you have questions, I think, Rosina, do you want them as they go or wait till the end? Is the end better?
End would be good, but like if
Okay.
there's something specific, right? Especially when we're looking at the learning part.
So if you're welcome to type questions in the chat, and I'll keep an eye out for them. And if I can answer, or if Funmi can answer while Rosina's talking, and otherwise we will, if there's something very specific, I will interrupt Rosina and go ahead. Otherwise, We'll just wait till the end. Okay. Thank you very much for coming, everyone, and thank you, Rosina. And I will stop.
Thanks, Mary. Hi, everyone. I'm Rosina. It's nice to have everybody here today. I'm just going to go over, the title says scheduled options for online exams. So what specifically are we talking about? We're just talking about allowing students to select from one of 3 intervals or one of 2 intervals, however you'd like to do this, for exam time slots. So they have to write their exam at certain intervals throughout the same day, right? They don't have this, the approach we used to use was an open 12 or 24-hour window. I never quite got to the open 12-hour windows. We used to do open 24-hour windows where it was still a timed exam, right? It was still a 2-hour timed exam, except they could, at their own convenience, take that at any time within 24 hours. Well, this approach is a little different. It's more restrictive, and it's just kind of enforcing not only a start time, but also an end time, right? So we do want students to begin at 10 a.m. or very close to 10 a.m. We do want students to end their exam at 12. So the enforced end time. And I mean, we're not super strict on this. We recognize that students might arrive late, so we do give a 10-minute, and we can do it. We did a 20-minute, what's called a grace period. So if they're arriving late or whatever, we're accounting for that as well. But this enforced kind of start time and end time is a little different because it takes away that guarantee that perhaps if they begin writing at 10:30, well, they're still going to have to submit at 12:10, right? If they begin the afternoon exam at 3:30, again, they still have to submit at 5:10 p.m. So the added restrictions, right? And I'll talk about that. I'll talk about why we decided to take this approach on. We did this last term in winter 21. And how it works and the benefits versus, some of the disadvantages also, right? Because I want to be clear about some of the overhead that this entails as well. So I'm just going to try to go through this as best as possible. I hope that it is helpful, right? And that, it was a learning curve. Certainly we had 3 exams last term and we called them term tests. By the 3rd one, we were a much better. I think, we got better, faster, things were happening a little more smoothly. And so this is just what I wanted to share with you today. First, we'll look at, what is the student's perspective? What do they see How do they interpret this scheduling? Because that's important, right? And nice and smooth process for the students, the setup structure, and then we'll look at some examples from CS 251. Before I continue, I just wanted to thank Steve Mann for being here. So Steve is with us. We did this together last term. So Steve is also here to answer any questions. If you want to say hello, Steve.
Hi, everybody.
But you don't, thanks. So Steve is here as well. Patrick Rowe and was our course coordinator, great help. And then of course, Funmi and Jan have always been very supportive in really helping us to be able to deliver these exams on Learn. So first of all, the motivation, as I said, we had the open 24-hour exams, and this worked reasonably well through Learn, right? With Learn, you have the ability to shuffle questions in different orders, so students are all getting a different ordering of exam questions. You also we would also incorporate question variation. So there's, students are receiving a random assignment for some of the questions in the exam. So, again, this worked reasonably well, but a couple of things. One, instructors have also shared their comments on this. It's difficult to be available 24 hours, right? And I'm not really, I tend to be a night person, but not a 2 a.m. person. So it's a little hard to be available to answer questions all the time, right? The last thing I do when I go to bed is check Piazza. First thing I do when I wake up is check Piazza, because students are taking a live exam, right? The exam is live, and you're just worried about questions coming up on Piazza. It's much easier to be available in these little 2-hour intervals, right? We share the work. One instructor does one interval, one instructor does another, right? Our ISA helps out as well. So that actually was, it ended up being very much more helpful and easy to share that time to be available on Piazza. So that was a big plus. But really the motivation came from the fact that we want to be able to assess, right, a student's individual knowledge of a course, right? So that's really what we're looking for. And designing online exams with the question variation, with the high number of questions as well, right? There's a lot of time and effort that goes into that process. And I felt like the time and effort going into this is kind of being offset by the fact that it's a wide open interval and there's the ability to share and discuss and all of that, right? So this is something we are a little bit happier with. No, we don't solve every type of cheating problem. It's just something that's, just one step closer to trying to assess students' individual knowledge of the course. The other thing was that I don't like the idea of our good students, right? Our good students being disadvantaged by collaboration. So it's interesting because talking to students, they actually share, from time to time in these kind of one-to-one meetings, students have shared frustration in that they're, working hard and doing their coursework, but the grades are so high and, people are collaborating and getting the same grades as they are, kind of thing, right? There's that frustration certainly coming from students as well in terms of collaboration. And I'm kind of hearing that a little more. I have a son in first year going to second year. I hear a lot of that from him as well, that in high school, it used to matter. Doing my own work and getting good grades used to matter. Now there's just so much sharing of stuff that it's almost like, what's the point, right? And this is some comments that I get from him as well. So it's interesting to hear, right, what students have to say. And the other thing I wanted to point out was, so since spring 2020, we've been running online exams, and we've done 3 a term. And so that's, a fair number of exams, 200, 240 students typically we have. And I can't recall a single student saying to me, right, that I couldn't complete my exam because my internet failed, or I was kicked out of Learn and I couldn't log back in, right? Connectivity issues are very rare. There's like other types of problems, like a student completely forgot about the exam and missed the exam. That kind of thing has happened, right, every now and then. And we're in an online world now. So, I mean, we can sort of anticipate that may happen. But connectivity issues haven't been a problem, really, from my assessment. And so I really felt like, it is perfectly fine to offer these scheduled times rather than a big open window, even for the international students, even for the students that are, right, totally different time zones as well. So that's kind of the motivation. And let's just first get into what does a student see in all this process, right? What's the student's perspective? Well, first of all, very early, like we actually do this right at the beginning of the term, we announce the dates, right? And so the dates are announced in terms of when your first term test will be, and the final it will be announced, to be announced typically. And also we give them this heads up that, where you're going to have 3 scheduled intervals, you're going to have to choose from one. More information is to follow, right? And so they know right from the beginning. And then we have subsequent guidelines and information coming through Piazza. So the first kind of involvement of the student is, of course, the group enrollment. Now, what's the group enrollment? Well, in order to facilitate this, we create groups in Learn. So you have a group called Term Test 1, and I'm going to show this when I go to Learn. And in Term Test 1, there's 3 subgroups. And the 3 subgroups are the 10 a.m. time slot, the 3 p.m. time slot, the 9 p.m. time slot. So it's just a matter of students selecting, right? And this is the view of what the student sees. The student comes in, they say, okay, this is the Term Test 1 group. I'm going to join one. And if they change their mind, they need to exit from one group before they join another, right? So there's no way they can be sitting in 2 exam times, because we don't want that. And so it's very simple, straightforward. A couple of things I wanted to point out here, and again, these are lessons that we learned as we went through, right? We need to tell the students that if they fail to self-enroll, so that they forget to do this, right, and we send out reminders, but if they don't select a time, then they're going to be automatically assigned. Learn will automatically assign them to one of these 3 options. And so that needs to be said. Also, you need to have an end date. An end date, like here, June 17th, is the last time that they're allowed to enroll, right? So there's a fixed time where there's no more group enrollment, and you're going to be automatically assigned. And so that if the exam's on the 21st, why did we have to stop group enrollment on the 17th? Well, because Learn takes at least 24 hours, and we found once it was, close to 2 days for Learn to actually go through and assign the auto enrollment. So you will see that students, let's say we had 10 that didn't select an option, those 10 get assigned, but I don't see that happening in Learn for, at least 24 hours. And I like to give 2 days for that to occur. So you need to kind of have an end time to the group enrollment in advance. And then the other thing that we learned was that, it's a good idea to not allow, right? Because students will email us the day before, or they'll email Patrick, our course coordinator, and they'll say, I want to switch time slots. Right? And so, I mean, he's nice and he'll do it maybe 1 or 2 days in advance, but we certainly don't want this happening on the day of the exam, right? And so there needs to be a disincentive. And so we do have a penalty applied, and it's a slight penalty, but it's something, right? You need to have some penalty for students that are switching around on the same day, unless of course they have a documented reason, right? Like they can, give a verifiable reason of why they did this, right? So again, things that we learned as we went through. And so that's, so students do the group enrollment, right? And they select their time. The next thing the students see is the term test official post. This is where a lot more information comes, right? And so I like to do this at least 2 to 3 weeks prior to the exam. So again, they know what to expect. In my experience, as long as students know what to expect, right? I really focus a lot on guidelines because it's so crucial. If students understand what the expectations are, there's 0 complaints about it, right? There's no issues. There's no questions, right? They all kind of understand this is a procedure. This is what we have to do. This will be the setup. And so we do explain on the Term Test 1 official post different things, right? Like how they have to go to the self-enroll Piazza post, a link to reference pages, a link to live sessions. So live sessions, we talk about how to best prepare for the exam. And so again, one important thing that I say in the live sessions and that we kind of reiterate a few times at least is that, and it's actually written right over here, it is recommended to, it is recommended to prepare for Term Test 1 as you would for an on-campus exam, right? And also students may fail to complete the exam if too much time is spent looking through course content. And another, basically what we're saying is if there's too much time spent collaborating, you run the risk of not completing the exam, right? And that is, I really feel that that is true. When we talk about the exam setup and what it looks like, I do feel it's very difficult for students to try to collaborate within the same exam because there's just so many questions coming in randomized orders. And also the questions themselves have variation, right? And the important thing is there's a full set of questions. And so they just don't have time to waste, right, in trying to, go through someone else's exam and try to figure out what questions do we have that are the same, right? And that's my opinion. I mean, maybe it's still, still students will try to do things. We know that, but I do feel that it is challenging. So it's important to say that although it is an open book exam, I highly recommend you prepare for it like an on-campus exam because you need to get through a steady set of questions. It's not too long. You do have time built in to check over your work. You do have time built in for, this grace period of in case you have any internet failures, but it's a steady set of questions. Try to get through them at a good pace, right? And they're short, we give them the format, right? True, false, multiple choice, written response where they have to submit a file. And that's just one or two questions, not a lot of written response questions. Primarily, they're fairly fast questions, right? So we say that. We also say the challenge level is higher than the biweekly quizzes because, again, the quizzes that we have are weekly or biweekly, and they are very kind of low-grade assessment, just making sure they're watching videos, right? So, again, we need to say something about the challenge level so they know what to expect. Piazza will only be available for private posts. Piazza is closed for all content-based questions, right? So you can't ask me, why is the assignment solution such and such during an exam, right? Because if we were on campus, we wouldn't allow that either, right? So again, these things need to be said clearly to students as well. And right, the other thing was that what we learned is students, you need to tell them, make sure you have a Piazza window open. Because now it's a 2-hour interval. Now I'm sitting here during this 2-hour interval. One of us is available. And so we will send reminder messages through Piazza, particularly the enforced end time. The enforced end time is something that we have to enforce, and we have to remind them that you must submit your questions by 12:10 p.m. Any question submitted after 12:10 is going to get 0, right? So again, a reminder email through Piazza lets them know when the submission time is approaching. And also, if there's any kind of question, right, that you feel like you need to elaborate on, or there's an ambiguous question, let's say, you want to send out a message on Piazza to let students know a little bit about that, right? So again, they should have Piazza open during the exam. And what else? That's, again, some basic information, but it's important to get that out there. Also, we do say right here in the Piazza post that it is a 2-hour exam, but there is a 10-minute grace period that's been given, right? And so, again, letting them know about submission time, that we want to submit by 12:10. p.m. and anything submitted after. Like this is an example. Like if you're in the 10 a.m. interval, you must submit by 12:10 p.m. or the question will be given 0. So again, they're given this heads up of how it's going to work, and so they know what to expect in advance, right? Okay, so that is what the students see, right? So this term test official post, and then also with the exam, of course, is a set of instructions that are similar. But we want to certainly make sure that they see those exam instructions before the exam so that it's not the first time they've ever seen this information, right? So they know what to expect from this Piazza post that's given in advance. And so now we come to like the setup process. So what do we need to do in order to facilitate this? Creating the groups, right? So first of all, creating the groups on Learn, and then the 3 different time slots, and then having a start time for group enrollment and end time for group enrollment, right? And that's a very easy step. Next, of course, is designing the exam, right? And really, if you asked me, well, how much more work is this compared to what I used to do, which was the 24-hour exams? I would say maybe it's now that, we've done this 3 times and I'm doing it now the 4th time. I would say, maybe 5 to not quite 10, maybe 8% more work, right? It's not a ton of more work to give these 3 scheduled exams. Really, the focus is, of course, the one primary exam that we're creating, right? The one primary exam needs to be created. A definite focus on the question library, making sure the questions are solid, having your co-instructor or your ISA, or, even what I do is I take, if I only had TAs, I would take a TA off of grading duty, right? One of my longer term TAs, someone that's experienced, and I would grab that person and get them to help look over the question library, because you need another set of eyes to check the questions. There's a large number of questions because of the variation. So it's really helpful to get someone else to check them over for you. And when you're done that, then really that's the crux of the work. It's just a matter of copying the one exam, creating the 2, right? And I'm going to go through this and Learn. And then the assignment. So you assign the first exam to the 10 a.m. people and the second exam to the 3 p.m. group. And that's it, right? It's just a matter of assigning it to the correct group. And then students will only be able to view one exam. They can when you unhide the quizzes, so I like to keep the quizzes hidden. When you unhide them, students should be able to see one and only one exam, because that's the one that they're enrolled in, right? And it's a problem if they can't see any, because that means, right, there's some sort of problem that's occurred. We've never had that problem, actually, but again, it's nice to just, make sure students can see one and only one exam, and we let them know that as well. So we'll go through that, but a little bit first before I go over to Learn, just quickly, some of the design principles that we've been using, right? Question variation is important, and having questions that come from a question pool. So, you give them like one question that has a pool where they're going to be randomly assigned one of 6 or one of 4, right? And so this kind of variation Learn really helps with, and the distribution as well. And so again, having these questions created in advance in your question library is really important. The other thing that's important, of course, is shuffling, right? So Learn so you have like 30 questions. They're coming to every student in a different order, right? And so this is why I really believe that it's important to have a higher number of questions. So down here it says, 10 long questions versus 20 to 25 short to medium, right? The short to medium are much better. The greater number of questions that you have, the increased number of possible permutations of this exam, right? So having they don't have to be terribly long or terribly hard, but having at least a number. What I really liked about one of our exams last term was we had a section in there, which is in the, kind of in the beginning of the exam, we had a section of 20 true, false, multiple choice questions. I think it was 20, but students were only assigned 10 of 20, right? So students were going to be assigned 10 of these really quick questions, true, false, multiple choice. But what did these really quick questions give to our exam? They gave a whole set of randomized order, right? So there's way more questions and way more possible, orderings that can occur. And so this was great, because it's going to be very hard for students to now sit together and say, well, what questions do you have and what questions do I have? And that is just going to be a waste of time, right? And they really run the risk of not finishing the exam. At least that's what I think. And so again, having these, maybe a subset, right? Not every question has to be super short. There's certainly going to be the written response. the more, longer questions that need to test content in a thorough manner, for sure. But again, having enough of these short, medium questions to just add to the question set, that's what I've learned really works, right? So that's another design principle. And then the question library, finalizing the question library first, right? So that's something I kind of learned the hard way. During the exam, right, I'm going to go to learn now, but I just wanted to say that during the exam through Piazza, we send messages like the examination period is ending in 25 minutes. Students must submit all questions no later than 12:10 p.m. And that's to my morning students. And then I'll send a similar message to the afternoon students, but it'll be 5:10. You have to submit by 5:10 p.m. And this helps, right? It helps to just give them reminders. We had and this was, again, three term tests last term. Each of the three had 3 scheduled intervals, right? Out of all of these, with 240 students, we had very, very few students that were penalized. They understood the rules, right? We had 2 all term, and they had very kind of slight penalties applied. I think one student, it was 2 questions worth 1 point and 2 points. So these low point questions. You can check the event log in Learn, right? So you might have a student that submits at 12:20, but the event log indicates that they actually didn't submit any question, right? No questions were submitted after 12:10, and so they will not receive any penalty. It's just maybe their browser window stayed open, or they clicked on submit, but it didn't work, or whatever, right? So again, it's very simple, and I'm going to show a screenshot of how you could check who submitted late, right? It's just the last few submissions, because everything comes in ordered in a timed order. So you look at the last few submissions, and then you can see who submitted late, and then it's simply checking their event log. No, they never submitted any questions. The window was just open. Or yes, this question 1 and question 9 were submitted after 12:10, and they're going to receive 0 on those questions, right? And so and again, we only have to apply that penalty twice. I mean, maybe Steve remembers something else, but that's all I remember from last term. Okay, so let me just go over to Learn, and I want to show my sandbox here. So I just copied in some stuff from my course, and this is just a sort of a play space. So before I look at the question library, let's go to the Connect and then Groups tab. And this is where we have the 3 groups. So we have like Term Test 1, group enrollment, and then we have the 3 groups created here, right? And again, a little bit of information, like students must log in by 3 p.m. They must submit by 5:10, right? This kind of thing. And then students this is my view as an instructor. So I see all 3. Students get the view of, they could just click on a button and they join the group, right? And so that is fairly straightforward to do, and that's the groups. And then Funmi helped me to be able to do this, right? I could just quickly show you, this is a new category. I'm going to just do a quick new group. So I'm going to call it Term Test 3 and some description here. The catch is there's a whole bunch of things here, right? You have to say number of groups self-enrollment. So that's the one you want. And then you say, well, I want 3, and group prefix would be Term Test 3. And this is where you do your start date for group enrollment, your end date, and this is where you click on, you want to make sure that students will be automatically assigned a group if they fail to self-enroll. And so then you just go in here, this is created, your 3 groups are created, 1, 2, and 3, and then you can just go in and rename them, right? So I would call this the 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. and we like to say noon just to make sure students understand that that's not midnight, because we've had that confusion as well. And then you just go in, little by little, and you update each of these. And so it's 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. and so on and so forth. And that's how you create the group. So very straightforward, right? Very simple to do. And now if the start date has occurred, students can begin to self-enroll. So that's the group creation. And so now I just created another group, Term Test 3, right? And that's what it looks like. And I could have added a little bit more description as well, like what we saw here in term test 1, right? This is the term test 1, and it has a little bit more description giving them an idea of what exactly they need to do in the different time slots, right? So that's the group enrollment. I'm going to go now to the question library and just give you a quick kind of view of how best to design the question library. And again, like we did not, I didn't learn this the first time, and Steve was a big help in this, in the sense that we started creating these folders, right? So we have, like, let's say the short answer questions, and we have, you know, we're creating question variation. But then when it comes to assigning, I want the 10 a.m. exam to get these questions. I want the 3 p.m. to get these questions, and the 9 p.m. to get another set of questions, right? It's a lot simpler if you have these separated folders already created in your question library, right? And so again, you know, you have different types of questions. This is my mock exam that you can see there on the left. And I have these subfolders created in the different question types. Now, you certainly don't have to do this for every type of question, right? And if you're doing this alone the first time, really, you know, you don't need to overdo it, right? And this is where, you know, it becomes very, very time consuming. So, you know, just a couple of questions, couple of variations on the questions. You don't necessarily have to have all these subfolders for every type of question, right? Like here, my register file question, I have 4 short answer questions created, and I'm just going to assign, you know, a question pool. So 1 of 4 will get assigned to all of the exams, right? So I don't have to have a subset of questions for each exam necessarily. Certainly there's going to be some questions where it's the same question, right? It's a simple 2-point question. I don't mind reusing that question again on all the exams, right? There's going to be questions like that as well. Certainly with the high number of questions, this will happen. And then sometimes what we do, we would have like a pool of 6 questions or a pool of 4 like this. And then we would just, every exam, all 3 of them got the randomized assignment 1 of 4 or 1 of 6, right? So that is perfectly fine as well. But again, I just want to quickly go in here. So let's just look at how, you know, simple it can be to create the variation, because once you start doing it, you get a little bit more comfortable at creating the variation. So here are 2 questions, and it's building a circuit. So one is building a calculator circuit. One is building so the calculator has to be able to do the multiply operation. Here, the calculator has to be able to do the addition. And then what I'll do is I'll click on it and I'll say, okay, I want to kind of add a variation to this. So I say save and copy. I like to say new on this. So if I don't want to touch it right away, I want to come back to it later. And then my question there is sitting down there at the bottom. This is the new one that I just copied. And then to reorder it, you just click on order and you pull it up to where you want it to go below the other ones there. So now my new question is there. And I can go in then at some point and decide, okay, well, my new question is just going to be, I'm going to change it to subtraction, right? And so we would adjust that, we would adjust the wording and whatever we needed to do there. And there are my 3 questions. And now, now to assign them to these folders, I just wanted to go through that. You have to go to move, and then you have these lists of everything that's in your library, and everything's expanded. So I unexpand, right? I kind of minimize those, and then I go into the correct folder here, and I just move it there. So let me just do that. With each of these, I'll move them to the correct folder. And this one, because I'm going to import this. We're going to go into the quiz and we're going to import this together. Okay, so now each of these folders has only 1 question, right? And that's okay. But my 3 exams will get a different question, right? And so what we found, right, what we found is that it's, you know, it's important. We try to minimize the intra, like within one exam, the collaboration that's happening is really inhibited. It's inhibited by, you know, the shuffling, the randomization, the large number of questions. And so it's difficult, right? But students, you will find friends will kind of go to the same time slot, right? That will happen for sure. And so again, to what we found is really important, what was more of a priority, was to make sure that the inter-exam collaboration is also inhibited, right? So we realized, let's use questions in the 3 p.m. exam and the 9 p.m. At least a certain number of questions were not seen earlier in the day, right? So 9 p.m., this is why we started doing the folders, because 9 p.m. has questions that were not used earlier. So, right, so students will try to share information from the 9 a.m. to the 3 p.m. or the 3 p.m. to the 9 p.m. And so, of course, that's going to happen, but you can try to minimize that with just a different question here, right? So that's all that we're trying to do. And so given that, so that's what the question library looks like. While I'm here at the question library, does anybody have any questions about this? Like just, kind of while we're here.
Rosina, there's one quick question in the chat. It says,
Yeah.
it says students in different groups have different exams. What about students in the same group? So in the same time slot, do they get the same set of questions?
Yeah, so that's what we'll look at. Yeah, for sure. So I mean, in the same time slot, it's all dependent on your design. So let's look at this multiple choice true false. Section A, this is the 9 a.m. Whoops, sorry, short answer. That one's short answer, 9 a.m. Right? So here, all these questions get assigned to the 9 a.m. time slot, but the thing is, students are actually assigned a pool, right? So one of the 6, or I might decide, right? These are short answer. We might decide we want to assign like 3 of the 6, right? So there is this variation happening on a per question basis, as much as is reasonably possible for the instructor to be able to do, right? Because you're not only worrying about the variation between exams, but even within the same exam. And I honestly, it was even fine if we just had 2. Sometimes we just had 2 choices within the 9 a.m. exam, and students were going to be assigned a pool, 1 of 2, right? And even that, right? Okay, there's a 50% chance that they'll get the same question as their friend, but at least it's some level of variation as well. So, and then if you continue this kind of idea across many of your questions, it's again inhibiting the collaboration that much more. So yeah, so that again, to answer that question, is basically dependent on the design of each individual exam. But I'll go through that because that's a very important question. So here, for example, the short answer section, right? My 9 a.m. students are going to get, I think I did 1 of 6 here, and the 3 p.m. are going to get 1 of 6, and the 9 p.m. are going to get 1 of 6. So let's go over there and look at the actual term test. So everything is a quiz in Learn, as we know. And so I'm going to go in, and this is my primary exam right here, right? And usually what I like to do, because I'm a little paranoid, I like to make sure everything is hidden while I'm working on stuff. So I keep things hidden. And then this is where you would add in the date, right? I keep it hidden until maybe 2 days before the start date, because when you unhide, then you can let students know, okay, students, you should be able to see your one exam, your one term test should be viewable now through Learn, and you will not be able to start it until the exam time arrives. So this one I would put the correct time on here. This was a 9 a.m., so I chose 9 a.m. for this instead of 10. And let's just do it together. And then we add in the grace period here, right? So we add in a 10-minute grace period there, prevent students from making further changes, right? So I like to make sure that all of that is set up. So this is my 9 a.m. exam, and what we want to do is we want to make sure that this exam, the question set is exactly what we would like, and everything looks good, right? So you want to make sure it's 1 question per page. You go into add, edit questions. This is the view that I prefer, where you can actually see all the questions. What we like to do is we like to create these folders, And when it's two or more instructors working on an exam, it's very helpful to have these folders, because you know you want to talk about the different questions and you want to refer. It's hard to refer to what short answer version A, right? It's easier to refer to the folder. And so section 2, I have we have the statement of academic integrity here, and then section 2 is the non-shuffled questions. So statement academic integrity is just asking students to make sure that they follow the guidelines and they enter in their name, right? And I really wanted to have a 0-point question on Learn, but you can't. So we had to make it a 0.25 points. So that's okay. Students have to sign that statement, right? Just to be able to be aware of the rules. And then we have a section here that's not shuffled. So you might want to do this, right? You might want to have questions that follow in sequence. So students need to, right, like they need to do one and then the other and then the other. And that's a non-shuffled section. And then the rest of these are going to be shuffled sections, right? So if you see here, this is a question pool. 1 of 6 is going to be assigned. These are my version A questions. Again, down here, another question pool under latches and another question pool. There was one that I wanted to create, which was not a question pool. So, oh, sorry, there was one that I wanted to create that was just 1 of 4, but it was not necessarily going to be different. It was going to be the same set, 1 of 4 across all exams, right? And you can do that as well. So we'll go through that, but let's just quickly add, let's just import that written response question that we just did. So you want to browse the question library, and then you go to your question right here, and then see, it's really, you just import the entire folder, right? Or you can create a question pool where, you know, if there were more questions in here, there's only one, so I don't need a question pool. But again, this is how you would do it here. When you would import from the question library to create a question pool, you would click on question pool, and then again, you'd be importing from the question library. So this question is my written response, and it belongs up here, right? And so this, you know, this is how we would do it so that we would, 2 instructors would be able to collaborate. But when it comes to actually delivering the exam, what I do is you know, my final version, I just put everything into one section, and I want it all to be shuffled. So section headings no longer matter, and I want to shuffle everything in this second section. So the first section is not shuffled. Here, right, we have, you know, 20, 25, 30 questions that are all the shuffled ones. And so then what we do is we go to that section, and we have to make sure, first of all, you want to make sure that the text is hidden from your students, so they don't see the section, they don't see the section heading, and that the questions are shuffled in this section, right? So that's what I like to do. And then I just go ahead and delete these. Okay, good. Everything is good to go, or, you know, we're happy with the set of questions. And then what we do is we just copy. So you go to quizzes, and you will copy this, and the copy that I want to create, this is my copy. This is term test 1, and this is going to be my 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. And I go into the restrictions and I put the correct time, right, that it's 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. as well. And then because this is my 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. exam, now is where I go through and I edit, right, the folders. I edit the questions. So I go in here, and, you know, some of them might be fine as is, but some of them you want to take the correct set of questions. So I'm going to get rid of short answer version A, and I'm going to bring in short answer version B, right? So I like to leave that one there, and then I'll bring in the short answer B, right? And then oh, whoops, I imported the whole thing, sorry. Okay, so just delete that. here I'm creating a question pool for the short answer question B, right? So I'm going to create a pool of all of these 6, right? So all 6 get imported, and I say I'm going to have one of the 6. I'm going to say this is my short answer version B, and they're 5 points each, and that's it. So that's my short answer version B questions, and I will take that up and delete the old one, right? So this is how we do it, where we create a copy, right? You create a copy of your original exam, and then you just go in and you import the correct folder from the question library. Some of these you might just keep as is, right? Some of these, well, this one, the transistor question, let's say, every exam, I'm going to say that's fine. You're going to assign 1 of 5, right? There are no subfolders for this question. It's just going to be 1 of 5 to every exam. But it certainly is nice to have these subfolders created. So, and then because it's very simple to just go through and grab the right question, right? So here's the written response one for the 3 p.m. exam, and so on and so forth. So we do that. We create the second exam, the third exam, and then we're done, right? So that's the process. I won't kind of drag it out too much in going through that. But it is, right, it is a little bit more work than creating one exam, but as long as that one exam is created well, when you go into your second and third exam, it's just a matter of importing the correct questions from the question library, and everything else is correct, right? And everything else stays the same. What you have to obviously change are the dates, right? So the time for this one would be 3 p.m. instead. 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. So that's, what I wanted to kind of show in Learn. Let me just do a quick preview of one of the term tests. So I'll go to, this is winter 21, and we're going to preview term test 1. And just kind of looking at, what students see. So this exam was 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. as well. And so again, they're told submissions have to be made by 11:10 a.m. And then you start, and what students see, right? This gives us an idea of what students see. Well, there's a statement of academic integrity. They enter their name. But students see all these questions, right? And they're like, it's a completely different ordering as, one of their friends. And so, right. So yes, they have the list, and they could, right. They could click one by one and do a comparison with a friend. But again, these questions are a steady set, and not all of them are simple, straightforward, 1-minute questions, right? Some of these are 10-minute questions easily. There are questions that require uploading a file, right? So uploading a file either to Learn or uploading a file to CrowdMark. So we do have, we did use CrowdMark for uploading a file, and I'll just give a glimpse of what that looked like. So, so again, so this is the file submission question comes after a whole bunch of these true, false, multiple choice questions, right? So again, if students are trying to find, well, what's your CrowdMark question and what's my CrowdMark question, or what's my file submission question, what's your file submission question, they have to rummage through all these questions to be able to find this question, right? And so that's why throwing the questions at randomized order is really helpful. Again, we like CrowdMark for different reasons, right? Because our TAs are much more comfortable as a grading platform. CrowdMark is very helpful. But I do find if we do use CrowdMark, the variation of questions needs to be pretty high, right? And so, so this was one sample. And then what we learned is that really having one submission to CrowdMark, but you can have a part A and a part B and a part C, right? That's a little better than having 2 CrowdMark question submissions, right? Because then students might get confused in terms of what folder do I submit to. So different things that we do. Of course, you don't have to use CrowdMark at all. This term in my term test 1, I am asking students to upload files to Learn, and I'm keeping everything in Learn, right? And again, that's a little bit easier because I can have these short 3-point questions where, and there's only 2 of them, where students will hand write a solution on a piece of paper, and they will upload the question to a Dropbox. Sorry, they will upload the question to the actual submission folder in Learn, right? And so that's a written response question as well. But this as well, CrowdMark is also possible. Let me just show you quickly how we did the CrowdMark, just in case anyone is interested here. So I just wanted to point out here, this folder that says file submission, CrowdMark, I wanted to point out that what we started to do, right, and there's the this exam we had 10 a.m., 3 p.m., and 9 p.m. What we started to do was we actually linked a PDF file. So sometimes you have these complicated diagrams, right? And again, you can have students submit this question to either CrowdMark or submit it to Learn, right? And whatever your choice is. But it was helpful actually to link them to a PDF file of, right? So you have a PDF file of the diagram. They can take that diagram and, you know, modify it as a soft copy. They can print it if they like. They're not required to do anything. They're not required to do either of those options. They can also just take a sheet of paper, hand draw their solution. They do not need to include the original diagram, right? They hand draw their solution and they take a snapshot and they upload it to the submission folder as well, right? But this was helpful, providing the PDF file to them, and it's linked within the question. That also was something that we learned was quite helpful as well. Okay, so and if you have any more questions, I'll come back to Learn, but just quickly to end off here, some of the advantages and disadvantages, right? So let's just talk about that briefly. So yes, it is a tighter timed interval. Comes a little bit closer to what we used to do on campus, but yeah, there are some things like you kind of feel bad. Students start the exam 30 minutes late. Well, they don't get their full 2 hours, right? And that's just the way it is. Really, it would be the same if we were back in the pack or, you know, on campus as well. If you arrive to your exam late, right, you don't get the full time, right? And that's unfortunate, but that's just a consequence. We did find that, you know, it is helpful to have at least some questions on the later exams to have some questions that were not seen earlier, right? So the big point questions, certainly, right? You don't have to do this for everything, but just the big point questions, right, should be a different set of questions for sure. And that's a good idea. I got some interesting student feedback. So I like to really check to see, well, is this worthwhile? Is it working? And I just have these one-to-one conversations with some students. And so some of the feedback is that, yeah, students found that collaboration was minimized given these 3 scheduled intervals as compared to 24-hour open interval. But they also said that, yeah, there will be sharing from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. They'll be sharing from, you know, 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. to the 9 p.m. So again, one of my students recommended, why don't you just give one time? Why don't you just do the 3 to 5 and that's it? You students don't have any other choice. Well, that's a little restrictive, right? My son in first year science and his courses, you know, 1,500 students in his courses, they had only 2 times offered. So they had a 9 a.m. time offered and a 6 p.m. time offered, and that worked perfectly fine as well, right? So depends, right? We have to be understanding as well. The other comment was to have less time between exam intervals, right? So like we have a fair number of hours, especially between the morning and the evening. Well, right, there's things that we can apply to this kind of approach to help reduce the collaboration even further. There are disadvantages, right? Certainly, you have to have the admin work of sending out the reminders, right? The reminders to group enroll, the reminders during every exam, you need to submit at certain times, and et cetera, right? The disadvantage of a little bit more work, right? The fact that you need this very well-defined question library. You need to be able to copy the first exam to the second two, and then you need to just double check all three exams that they're all in good shape and they're ready to go, right? So the double checking in that process as well. So it's really helpful. It was 2 of us last term to do this, but it was, a little bit heavy on us, especially the first 2 exams. The last one, we were, a little bit better and faster. I moved to this term, I'm teaching by myself. And so I moved to 2 exams per term because I'm like, wow, 3 is a lot, right? So I moved down to 2 exams per term. Our weighting, the way the course outline works, we're very much an exam-based course. We used to be on campus. We used to have a 60% final on campus. Now we don't have a 60% final, but our term tests, we feel, are the best way to assess students' individual knowledge of the course. And so 60% of the course for term tests, so including all of them, including term tests 1, 2, and 3, or in my case now, term tests 1 and 2, they add up to 60% of the course, because that's where I feel I'm really getting to assess students, how much they understand the course content. And then also just making sure, right, because Learn doesn't have the ability to have this enforced end time. If a student starts at 10:30, they will still get their full 2 hours, but we wanted to inhibit that. And so you have to do this manual checking. First of all, we did pass on a comment through Jan to D2L. We did request that we have this enforced end time, right, available. And hopefully, I'm hopeful that that will come through. But to check the event logs, to check the attempt logs is actually very, very straightforward. It doesn't take a lot of time. You can check to see who's red flagged, but the way I like to do it is just go to the quiz completion. You just check the latter 10, right? So they're all in order of submission. And this was our final term test. So the submission time was the last time that they were allowed to submit was actually 11:20 a.m. So they were this is wrong here. It's actually 11:20 p.m. So this must have been our 9 p.m. exam. So 11:20 p.m. was the last time they could submit. Now you can see everyone was totally fine. This last student submitted about an hour late, but this student was not penalized because it was an accessibilities student. So the student was given actually an extra hour. So no penalties applied, right? But it's very quick to just go and check the event logs and just, the attempt logs and see, did anyone actually submit late? By and large, no one does, right? Everyone is fine. So that's, the way that you check it. And then in terms of disadvantages, that's really all I can think of. And I'll let Steve, give any comments if he thinks of any other disadvantages. But that is pretty much it for my presentation. I have included in here some sample questions, right, that we learn. And, you're welcome to look at that as well as you like. But thank you.
I'm talking, but I'm muted. Thank you very much, Rosina. Oops, here I am on the screen. In the interest of time, anybody who'd like to go, you may go. But if you want to stay around, we'll still have Rosina answer some questions. Can you stop screen sharing there, Rosina?
Oh, sorry. You don't like
I see that we have a few questions in the chat, and
yeah,
Fumi
sure.
has her hand up. So I might go to Fumi first because she might have something that's important that people will want to hear before they leave.
Thank you, Mary. Sorry, I thought I shared my camera. Okay. Thank you so much, Rosina. I just wanted to point that I think this was an oversight. You forgot to show how they have to restrict the questions to the group, because that is important. If not, the students will end up seeing the 3 quizzes.
Yeah. I forgot that.
Yeah, that is a very critical step.
Yep. So you can see my screen still here, right?
Yes.
So this is term test 1, the 3 p.m. time. I go into restrictions. Yep, we went in and we changed the time to 3 to 5, but you have to attach the correct group, right? And so Let me just go through that again. So you come into the restrictions tab, you come down to create and attach, and then I go down and I select group. Group enrollment, and I select the correct group that I want. So it's term test 1, and this is my 3 p.m. group. And so now only this group is attached to this exam. And so only the people that enrolled in this group can therefore see and view this exam. And I would do that for each of the 3 of them, right? So yeah, thanks, Funmi. That's very important.
Thank you.
Rosina, also, will we have a copy of your slides to share to the participants? That was also
yeah, sure, definitely.
Chat. Okay, thank you very much. There were some additional questions sort of about the technical integrity sort of thing. So
yeah.
It says, if students have a connection issue during the test, did you extend their time or swap them to a later time slot, or did it depend on the amount of progress? And secondly, what do you do with students who claim they had technical issues?
Yeah, definitely, a tricky issue to resolve. So good thing for us, we have a course coordinator, and we're like, here, Patrick, deal with this. Well, we make decisions together as well. So what we would do, we need to have some sort of documented, even if it's a text message. Like I had a student in her apartment building, the internet all went out, right? So they all received text messages from the building manager that the internet's going to be out in such and such hours, right? So we can verify that to some degree if possible, and we try to be reasonable, right? So, I mean, a student completely misses an exam time, like they forgot totally, and we let them write the next day, but we apply a penalty, a 25% penalty, right? And that's significant enough. So it kind of depends. Now, if the issue really becomes if they began an exam and they've already been assigned all their questions, right? And then in the middle of it, they had a connectivity issue. To be honest, I've never experienced that, but I would be hesitant to kind of fill them into another time slot, right? I would maybe just accept their exam with some exceptions, right? So we grade their exam out of less, or we grade whatever they were able to do. Because again, giving them or assigning them to a new exam time, it's a little bit of an advantage because they've already seen these questions. So I think that's what I would do, is I would just take at face value whatever they submitted and grade it out of whatever number of questions they did, and do that kind of thing. Maybe Steve has a comment about that.
Oh, and since they've completed only part of the exam, probably shift some of the weight to the other exam.
Mm-hmm.
And I would bet that you guys, because you're online and you have the opportunity for the students to be contacting you right away, and because you have it scheduled, I'm betting you have fewer of those. It would be really interesting to hear, but I bet you have fewer of those issues or people complaining, or because they can contact you right away via messaging or something, usually if there's something going on, and it's not like they contact you 24 hours later saying I had a problem. Like, you can address it more easily. That would be my guess. But anyway, we have a couple questions in the chat. Jenny, I think you were first in my little thing here.
Hi, yeah.
In the raised hand, sorry.
Yeah. So I think this is really interesting. Thanks so much, you guys, for sharing this approach. I have been doing the 24-hour time slots throughout the pandemic. And one of the things I always tell my students with that is it's impossible for me to stay up for 24 hours. I don't have 2 instructors to switch time between, or a class coordinator or anything like that. And so they just know that, like, I'll be doing my best, but it's unreasonable to expect me to be up 24 hours. With these 3 time slots, I could see students thinking it's reasonable for me to be glued to my computer at 9 a.m. to 11, 3 to 5, and 9 to 11 p.m., which to me is still not reasonable for myself as one person with a 4-year-old who needs to get to school and things when you're allowed to go to school and stuff. So how do you think that balance really works? Did you see that there was so much more of an expectation that, yeah, you're going to get back to them on Piazza or whatever messaging tool you use within like 5 minutes, as opposed to understanding and having that more compassionate approach to the instructor?
Yeah, no, definitely. I find students are pretty understanding. I mean, we may, you're right though, with the fixed 2 hour exams, they, the expectation is my instructor is going to be around, right? And I mean, we're able to do this because it was two instructors and an ISA, right? So we're able to do that a little bit more. But I mean, even if let's say I'm assigned to the 2 hour exam, the 9 p.m. to 11, right? And I'm a little, right, I have other things going on at that time. So I may not be glued to my laptop as well at that time. So you can get back to them in a reasonable window, but I think it's important to lay out what you're able to do in advance, right? So we do say that we may not be immediately available. And if, and you could say something like, if I'm not able to get to your questions, just do the best you can, right? And we can discuss it after the exam, right? So certainly you let them know that, even though these are 2 hour intervals and you will try to be monitoring the Piazza questions, it's not going to be like an immediate response, and there's not a 1 minute response time. And also, like, we have to make it clear to students, right? Because some of the questions we get are just simple questions that maybe they don't really, right, need to be asked, right? So again, students can just use your assumptions, right? Just based on whatever you assume the question is asking, go ahead and answer it. And if there's any problems, we can discuss it later, that kind of thing. So we let them know the questions have been checked several times for clarity, right? If anything's unclear, go ahead and try to answer it as best as you can, that kind of thing. But I mean, absolutely, like I do find, for us being available for those 2 hours, 2 hours, 3 times a day is a lot simpler. It was hard for me as well with the open 24 hour.
Right. I just think my question was more like about like the feasibility of three approaches spread across more than a 12-hour space of time for a course with one instructor and no guarantee of experienced TAs who could sort of take a shift, if you will. Like even with what you were saying if I had the 9 to 11 p.m. shift, as opposed to if I had to man all three shifts that are over a 13-hour window of what you guys presented as that interval. I think it's more about that sort of like, is this really feasible for one prof with 100 students and inexperienced TAs to pull off in a way that's going to allow students the access they need?
I mean, what you could do is poll your students, Jenny, to see where they, at the beginning of term, to see where they actually are. Maybe you could end up with 2 time slots instead, for example, just different strategies, and it might not work for you as well.
Right. Does CTE have guidelines then around this timed approach of sort of like how far apart those two need to be? Like there's been guidelines about like a 24-hour window is like the minimum, then a 12-hour window is the minimum. Will there be similar sort of guidelines?
Those weren't our guidelines. Those were the
I'm just saying, like, there's been guidelines to sort of limit our flexibility.
Yeah. Again, it depends on your students, right? I mean, I would do a poll, because I mean, if they're living in a different time zone, then it might be unrealistic for them to be, if they're living 12 hours apart. But I think people have been able to find out what would work. Some people are doing it maybe 6 hours apart, depending on where their students are living.
Right. Just in terms of feasibility, I just have a comment on that. I do think it is feasible as an instructor. But I think, again, like Mary suggested, I would probably just do two intervals. And then really what I find, I mean, it's great to kind of poll and ask students, but and I get that feedback. But I find that as long as they know in advance, right? Hey, I have 2 options. I'm going to do it at 9 a.m. or I'm going to do it at 6 p.m. As long as they know that in advance, right? And I mean, early on in the term, or they know for the final, this is what I'm going to have to do for my final exam, they are actually fine, right? They can manage to sort of organize themselves, make sure they have this 2 hours available, and they figure it out. So yeah, that's been my experience.
And I was going to say, the other thing is you're not there in the 24-hour window anyway, so it's not really any difference if you're not there as long as they know ahead of time, Jenny, that may not be there. You may not be able to be checking during that time period. So I think it's all about managing the expectations of the student. We have one more question in hand raised is Stacy.
Hi, Rosina. So I was wondering about why you're manually checking the time submissions, because I thought in Learn, the end date is an automatic end date. You get the window 10 minutes and then it auto submits at the end of that. So I think the due date, if you set a due date and not an end date, you have to check manually because that's just a loose due date. But I could be wrong.
Yeah, sure. If Funmi can, I think, explain this better. So
Yeah. Okay, so this was something we found out, I think, when after one of the tests from Rosina. So the end dates actually, so you have like an interval. So you have like 10 hours. Sorry, for Rosina right now, she has just 2 hours. But then students can start, say, but then the time exam is just the start and end date says 10 to 12. But then you go on the sorry, Rosina, can you go? I just can't remember the exact name.
sure, restrictions.
Yes. Thank you. If you just scroll to the bottom, so the start time is just availability. It says this exam is available for you to start between this window. But then the timing, the enforced section is where the trick is. So it's enforced for 120 minutes. So that's 2 hours, but then there's a grace period of 10. So if a student starts, say, at 10:30, even though the start time says 10 o'clock, they start at 10:30, they still have the 120 minutes plus the 10 minutes to finish the exam. So they're not going to be ending at 12 o'clock, which is the end date. But if a student wants to start, exactly. But if the student wants to start at 12:01, then they won't be able to start the exam.
Right. Okay. So I've never used both the timing and an actual end and start date. So I wouldn't have known that strange behavior.
Yes.
So another comment I'll make since we're here is I would rather, when I make the exams, I'm going to have like a 1 minute grace period. If you want to give them extra time, just put it at a time limit. And the reason is that Learn gives a countdown timer for how much time they have left. And when it runs out, they get that grace period, but there's no indication of how long that grace period is or when they need to submit it. So I recommend actually putting a grace period of 1 minute. And if you want to give extra time in the grace period, just put extra time in the time limit.
Yeah, that's what we started doing actually at Steve's suggestion. So like, for example, we went for our 10 a.m. to 12, we actually built in the grace period here because again, like Steve said, students get that clock, right? They get the timer and they get to see the countdown, but they don't have any countdown for the 10-minute grace period, right? So we kind of built it in here, but depends on what people want to do.
And one other little
comment will be. I'm sorry, Stephen. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. It's your question.
Oh, I was going to say the clock will be incorrect if they start late, though.
The clock says how much time. That's if they stay right. If they start late,
yeah,
it will show them that they have the full, I guess, 120 minutes or whatever.
Yeah.
All right.
But we tried to make that clear in some of the guidance.
Well, thank you guys so much. I think it's probably, unless there are any final questions.
So, I have one other final comment.
Yeah.
So Rosina showed sort of two sets of exam start times: 9 a.m., 3 p.m., 9 p.m., and 10 a.m., 3 p.m., 9 p.m. The first exam, we had the 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. exam, and there were students saying, I thought I was registered for the 9 p.m. exam. I ended up being registered for the 9 a.m. exam. That's right. And we're telling this after the 9 a.m. exam started. So we switched it so that none of the exams had the same number for the start time to try and avoid that confusion.
Brilliant strategy. Yeah. Okay. Well, if no one else has any final questions, thank you so much, Rosina and Stephen and Funmi, for doing this. And we'll post the recording and the slides. And if there are further questions, come to us, come to one of us. I'm sure